Welcome to our fourth Zoom talk about our fourth blog post. I'm Amy Matthews.
And I'm Sarah Barnaby.
And we are the founders and co-directors of Babies Project. This month, we have been focusing on trying to make available this handout that we've created called Preparing for Caring, Touch Handling and Bonding. And we've done these blog posts and Zoom talks to try to make the information more available and more explicit. So what we're going to do today is do a little bit of introductions and saying hello, and then Sarah's going to talk through what we put in the blog post, what she wrote in the blog post. And then at the end of the time, we'll have time for questions and comments and anything like that. As we go, if you have any questions or comments and want to write them in the chat, you certainly can. And then this will be recorded, so it'll be available for as long as you want. Actually, we'll put it on our YouTube channel, which we're getting going. So, so to start with, just to do a little hello and introduction, is there anybody who wants to say anything, who was here before or who is here for the first time? If it's your first time here, you might say what brings you, why you came, how you heard about us. And if you've been here before and you want to say anything about why you've come back or what you found valuable about it, that would be great. I think at the end, I didn't ask Sarah about this, but at the end, we've been talking about also continuing doing these talks in different ways. So we'll leave a little time at the end if you have something you wish we would do or ideas about how we could continue. We'll make some space for talking about that at the end. At the end, but not now. For now, introduction. So if you want to say anything about who you are, why you came, what brings you, what you're interested in, feel free to unmute yourself and talk.
Yeah, I introduced myself because I wasn't here in the other 3 modules. So I know about this format because I know you too. I am in the IDMI program in Italy, which is suspended by now. So for now. And yeah, I missed the first 3, well, missed in person, the first 3 talks. I will find it. I believe they are recorded. So my name is Maura and I live in Italy.
Thank you, Maura.
Okay, so hi, I can connect. My name is Ariana. I'm here with my son Isaiah. He's 3.5 months. And I heard it from a friend of a friend called Amelie. I don't know if she's here. I don't think so. Anyway, it's the first time I come and I read the blog. I found it very useful, so I'm very curious.
Super.
And where are you joining us from, Shiriana?
So I live in New York, in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
I didn't hear, is anyone, are you in Brooklyn too?
I'm in New York, but I'm on the Upper West Side.
Okay. And I'm French, so my accent.
Welcome.
I'll go next. I'm Ashley, and I've been here a couple of times. This is my son Florian, and we're in Saskatchewan, which is in Canada, the center of Canada. We're in Regina, and yeah, I'm really enjoying working with Baby Ball and the different handling procedures. I like that it gives me some tools to work with him, which isn't just like entertaining him.
Yeah. Great. Super. Let's see. Anybody else want to say anything about Maybe we could go through and everybody could just say where they are, because I think it is fascinating. I love how we come from different places. So if you're willing to just unmute yourself and say
I
what
just
city or
unmuted
country.
myself, so maybe I go next. Hi, I'm Satu. I'm in Berlin, in Germany, originally from Finland. I'm a colleague, I'm a BMC teacher, but also a student in the same INMI program with Maura and Cinzia, who's somewhere in this screen. I've been here every time, also because I find the principles so applicable to life in general that I feel really nourished after these talks, after just listening and being with the questions and being with you and being with the community that feels very far away right now. So I'm glad we get to come together. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Satu. I'll also just point out that Satu did the Finnish translation of our handout for us. So if you've downloaded it in Finnish, we have it thanks to Satu.
I think I will go. I'm Rosana, and I live in the Bay Area. And I've been working with kids, mostly like play groups, mostly like 0 to 5. And also I teach family dance for families, and I teach classes about movement development for parents, for educators. And something that I really would like to do is what you guys do, you know, Amy and Sarah. I would love to have a place that I could have like this kind of mommy baby circle that we could talk about development, but really focus on babies, because until now the play groups that I have worked have the big spectrum, you know, like 3 months old all the way into almost 5. But I really would like to have groups that we could really focus on babies. So I feel that I've done the IDMI, but I know it's something that we are learning every day. So I'm really enjoying this time to really focus on babies. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Rosana.
So I'm Leah, and I'm in Brooklyn, New York, and I've studied with Sarah and Amy for a number of years, BMC student and also IDMI student, and I'm an infant craniosacral therapist as well, and a birth doula. Thanks for having this, continuing to have all your wonderful offerings.
Thanks, Leah.
I might go next. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm Cinzia, and I'm also in Berlin, in Germany at the moment. Originally Italian, but also lived 20 years in Australia, where I have made most of my practice there with mothers and babies, and worked a lot in disability with dance therapy. And I'm finding this space incredibly beautiful, nourishing also because we have this combination of conversational theories, but also we see some babies and we can see them immediately. Even now you can see so much what's happening, and it's really beautiful, very nourishing space. Thank you.
Thanks, Cinzia.
I can go next. I'm Elena. I'm in New York, and I apologize if you hear lots of screaming in the background. I have 2 very loud children. And I've been working with Sarah with my second, who's now 8.5 months, for probably, I guess maybe 4.5 months. Kind of, we started right before the pandemic hit. And it's been really fascinating applying all the principles, and then also watching, I feel, well, Sarah will correct me, but he feels to me reasonably textbook and how he's been progressing through all the steps. And so it's been really fascinating to watch him put it all in practice. and then participating in these conversations with all of you and hearing all the different viewpoints and experiences from around the world as well. So that is me.
Thanks, Elena. Okay. Well, I'm going to pass us over to Sarah to talk about the blog post. And if you came in after I said this, after Sarah speaks, we'll have some time to discuss the blog post, and then we'll have some time at the end to talk about ways we might want to continue doing this, because this is the last of this series. So, Sarah, it's all yours.
Thank you. I just want to say hi, Rachel. How did everyone get a chance to look at the blog post? Well, if you didn't, you can after if you want. I'm going to try to not read the blog post, but talk about some of the main ideas and kind of set it up so we can have a discussion. So in previous sessions, we have kind of gone from top to bottom of our handout in both in our blog posts and these sessions, and talking about the ideas and then what comes out of the ideas in terms of our handling suggestions. And it so happens that, so this is the last one for the handout, and it's a lot about moving. So how do we move a baby from our arms to the floor or to a changing table or somewhere else? How do we pick them up? How do we transfer them to somewhere else? How do we reposition them? And one of the big questions might be, or I'm going to propose, is because agency, and I'll say more about what we mean by agency, but because agency is really important to us, we went through a whole process of articulating and prioritizing our values, and agency came out on the top. Not something we necessarily knew was going to happen in this process, but it's what it came out with a couple of years ago, and we've been really happy with it. It seems to be holding water, so to speak. So by agency, we mean the ability to act, to have an impact, to learn from our experiences, to take risks, and to be in participation with other people and the world and our environment. So it encapsulates both the idea of action, agency, agent, actor, action. All of those are related in their meaning, but it doesn't mean action without being in relationship. So, and in a way, it's kind of the crux of what we do. How do we help ourselves and others realize fully, take on our agency and all that it means, and support other people with the premise that we can each have agency, we can each participate in the world, have some power in the world, but also acknowledge that we're with other people and we're with a bigger environment, and what we do has consequences. What other people do has consequences. So how are we in relationship there? In our work with babies, we think it's really important and fundamental to acknowledge that babies have agency from the very beginning. So babies don't, we could say they don't have as much agency, or the way their agency plays out as a baby is not the same as it is later on as we develop. But that's not the same thing as saying a baby doesn't have agency. To say that what they can do, how they can act, is different than how we can act as adults. So then in the question of handling and how do we move a baby, a question might be, what does it mean to support a baby's sense of agency while we're doing so much for them, while we're the ones who are moving them around, while they're not the ones actually initiating the action necessarily? And that's a lot of what we want to impact today and in general. And it's the reason I think that we start with agency. So we think agency is the idea of agency is also like what leads a baby. If we respect their agency, if we nurture their agency, helps them become good participants in the world. And that means being being able to be a good friend, being able to be a good neighbor, being able to be a good member, participating member of the community, the family, all of these different relational structures. So, another really fundamental, not necessarily value, but a fundamental reality for us as humans is gravity in space. And gravity it's the reality, it's inescapable. It's what we kind of land into when we're born. And there's a lot, I feel, out in the world about how gravity eventually defeats us and gravity's dragging us down, and some kind of negative ideas about gravity. And we don't agree. It's like gravity is how we evolved on Earth to be able to move and eventually get up to upright, both as human species as well as each individual as they're making their way through life and through their babyhood to get up. So we want to pull out that gravity is something that we could say it's the water we swim in, although it's not water, it's gravity and air. And so how can we support a baby to get comfortable and familiar with gravity? Gravity is something that always is there underneath us, the earth. And the more we're familiar with it, and Amy talked about this last time, and it's in the previous blog post about 4 surfaces. One of the reasons we think it's so important to help a baby get familiar with their different surfaces is so they're familiar with gravity, and so that is a support for them to stay comfortable and familiar with gravity as they get up higher, and as they learn to also go up and down. Kind of fundamental principle of developmental movement is that finding the down support is necessary to come up. And that the more the down, we're familiar with the down and we know it as a place of orientation, a place of safety, that that's going to be supportive. And it's a little bit, I think we could bring in attachment theory here. We talk about primary caregivers as being like a home base for a child, and then when they get mobile and they start away, have the ability to crawl away or roll away, it helps them go off and explore because they know they can come back to a home base, a secure home base. Similarly, knowing that we can go back down to the ground for safety is something that supports us as we're finding our way up. So that leads us to the next part of the blog post, the next part of what I'm going to talk about, which is falling. And the importance of developing really good falling skills. I think out in the world, in a general way, there's a lot more focus and prioritization on getting up, getting vertical, getting to walking, that's seen as an achievement and very much looked at, and it is an achievement and a milestone that we want all babies to get to. But we want babies to get there, to get up, however high they get up, so this is also progressive, to be able to get down from where they can get up. And the getting down skills are a big support for the getting up skills. Usually getting up happens before getting down, but in the getting up, we're also building the skills to get back down. The pathways are the same up to bring us back down. So something we talk to parents about, something we think, well, something we observe that has become part of what we do with parents is to reframe falling for them. And I think it especially plays out in the period when a baby has gotten themselves up to standing, maybe they're starting to cruise and walk along different furniture, etc. And and in that, they're also falling. And one of the most functional ways to fall from standing early on for a baby is to sit down on their butt really fast. And it's the alternative. It's a really good alternative to falling backwards. And it can look from the outside like, ouch, that hurts. That should be avoided. That was a fall. Oh my goodness, let me come help you. And so we spend a fair amount of time helping parents and other caregivers see falling in a new way and to appreciate a masterful fall or a skillful fall, which in general is a fall that is not, that's safe, that doesn't result in injury. The biggest risk for injury is hitting the head, especially backwards. It's also the biggest, from a kind of startle and fright perspective, it's often the most unpleasant. So we often say to parents, like, we want your baby, we want all babies to be masters at falling. We want them to have lots and lots of ways of getting down from wherever they can get up to. And a lot of our handling suggestions and our general, like, let them get there themselves rather than helping them get there sooner, is about developing falling skills. And we'll do things like, if we see that a baby falls to the right all the time and doesn't seem to choose falling to their left, how can we help them fall to their left as well? So we're looking at helping babies fill out their falling repertoire and helping parents see that falling skills are movement skills, that they're part of the whole movement repertoire. And there's a way, yes, we want to get better at not falling when we don't want to fall, but the falling is, we think it's not functional to just to have a strategy that is entirely dependent on avoiding falling, rather than having good strategies about falling well. Okay, so with that framing, agency, gravity, falling, we can get into some of the specific suggestions that we have about it. First of all, I'll talk about picking a baby up and bringing them down to the floor. Our suggestion that we have on our handout is that, as much as possible, or as a general habit, to bring a baby down through their side. From holding them, bring them down through their side. And then when we pick them up, can we take them through their side and bring them back up? And specifically in the going down, we're suggesting that when we bring a baby, get a baby here. So I'm in something like baby ball here, that when we bring a baby down to the floor, that we're going to bring their bottom down first, so their hip down first, and their head's going to be down last. And then the opposite is true when we bring them, when we pick them up. So from being down, we're going to bring them up so that their head comes up before their butt. One of the reasons we do that, one of the biggest reasons we do that, is because a functional falling pathway is, if I'm falling from here, I don't want to hit my head. I want my butt to land first. I want to reach my arms out and then come down. And when I'm getting up from the floor, when a baby's getting up, learning to get up to sitting, for example, their head is going to come up first in a functional way. Their senses, their curiosity, their wanting to be up higher, their perception is what's going to bring them up. And the rest comes before. So in our handling skills, we're trying to model pathways that make sense to the baby, that will not that necessarily makes sense from the beginning, but that makes sense in the movement development they will learn eventually. So if we look at the contrasting case, we don't necessarily think it's functional to take a baby down to the floor with their head going down first. It's not a great way to get to the floor. Well, it might be a functional way to get to the floor once we know how to get to the floor head last. There's acrobats and other people who know how to get to the floor head first, probably, but not babies. This way of bringing a baby down through their side also involves a roll. So there's a way it's three-dimensional. We're rolling them through space. That gives them stimulation in their vestibular mechanism, their inner ear, about knowing what up and down is, and helping them learn to be oriented in this trajectory from being higher to being lower, from being lower to come up to higher. Something that's a baby needs to fall well, to protect their head, and also to just know where they are in space. So it relates to the ideas of safety, orientation, etc. We also, another aspect of bringing a baby down through side is that when we bring a baby down through their side, eventually they get to see that the floor is coming. Now that might not be true for a tiny little baby whose vision is not, an experience of the world is not ready for it. But eventually this trajectory lets the baby see where they're going and lets them start to be able to participate. So we come back to agency, to start to know where they are, to see, oh, there's the floor, I'm going down, it's time for play, or it's time for whatever. We also make recommendations about saying something to the baby about these transitions, about helping them anticipate what's happening, what's going to happen, which we think also supports their agency. We're going to focus actually on the handling skills more than the talking part, but certainly part of it. One other point about down and up through side is that we recommend supporting a baby along their midline. So for a little baby who can't support their head yet, we would support their head and their butt, or the top and the bottom of their spine. That helps a baby feel their midline. They're also nice, heavy, weighted, bony landmarks. We can help keep the head and the rest of the body connected, so can help the baby feel safe rather than like, whoa, if we're not supporting the head so well. It also keeps the arms free. So when I bring a baby down to the floor, not here in front of their arm. Especially for a baby who can see the floor and is starting to develop their own movement skills, we want their arm to be free to start to connect to the floor, whether it's onto their forearm, to be on their side, or to roll onto their front. And eventually an older baby will reach their whole hand out, an open hand, and kind of catch themselves and go from there. Really important falling skill, as you can imagine. I hope you can imagine. Okay, I think those are the highlights of putting down and picking up. And the other handling suggestions have to do with repositioning a baby between being on their side and being on their front. So another reason we recommend bringing a baby down through their side is that we don't think it's necessarily a great experience for a baby to be placed directly either on their back. Sometimes it's unavoidable, and especially right on their belly, right on their front, prone. So we recommend helping a baby get to tummy, starting from their side. I'm holding the baby, but this could be on the floor. And then gradually helping them roll, a quarter roll, to arrive on their front. And then the opposite would be if they're on their front and it's, for whatever reason, we're going to roll them out of it. We recommend rolling them out of it. So this arm on the side towards me. I'm not going to lift the baby up and shift them onto their side. I'm actually going to set it up so that I roll the baby over their own arm, over their own shoulder to come to side. So that while we're doing the movement for them, we're taking them through a rolling movement that they can feel in their body. They can feel their body weight, changing contact, changing surfaces. They have a chance to keep their head oriented if we go slowly enough. Timing is a big part of helping a baby stay oriented and possibly learn something from our movement transitions for them. So while we say in general that we don't think babies need to be taught to learn, taught to move. Great, there's a little, thanks Ashley, just demonstrated. While we don't think we need to teach them to move, we can take them through pathways so that the pathways they'll learn become familiar. We think that's a distinction. It's not the same thing as teaching them to learn, but we're orienting them to gravity, to their own body as we're handling them. Okay. There's something to be said about the rolling, about head writing and about the head managing, and maybe we'll talk about that more in the discussion. Another reason that we recommend not kind of positioning directly here or directly here, but that what is gained in the transition between them, including with the head management. Okay, to finish this part, I wanted to say a few things about we try to avoid saying don't do this, but we do have a few things that we suggest not doing. And one of them is picking a baby up under the arms, which is, at least in the US, the way we see most people pick up their babies. Why don't we recommend that? For a number of reasons. One is that the baby's kind of hanging in space and their undies are falling off. We think it helps a baby feel safe and oriented, to feel ground under them, and we provide that ground, that environment when we're holding them. We also think that we're also not supporting the head, and especially for a little baby or any baby who hasn't learned to get themselves up to sitting on their own upright, they have to support their head without being able to use any other part of their body to help support their head, including their arms. So we've kind of taken their arms out of that, and their body is not connected to itself. So we think when we're handling a baby, we want them to be gathered in so that their body is their own, in a way that they have access to their body. We make a general suggestion to not handle a baby by their arms. We think this is a really key, relates to agency. We talked one of the sessions and in one of the at least one of the blog posts about the importance of the midline milestone, 3 or 4 months, when a baby can get their hands together and their hands to the mouth. And especially once that happens, their hands and their mouth and whatever they've got in their hands to their mouth is so much a part of how they know themselves, how they start to explore the world. And if we're kind of pulling them around or taking their arms away from them, they can't do that. And then holding a baby this way compresses their ribs. Now, it's probably not hurting them. Lots of babies are resilient, and think it's necessarily hurting them, but their ribs are still our ribs we use with our breath, and a baby's ribs are developing, their diaphragm's developing, they're learning. Breathing is still a relatively new experience. And we feel if we can not interfere with the breathing, better not to. We recommend not propping a baby and sitting or standing. So not putting them, not standing them, not sitting them, but letting them get there in their own time. We can talk more about that. I think we've made some points about that in the past. And then the other thing is we recommend not letting a baby's head fall back, either when we're holding them or when we're bringing them to the floor or picking them up. So this is kind of about picking them up under the arms and the head. What we see is sometimes when a baby's being picked up from lying down, pick them up this way, and the head goes back a little bit and then comes up. So there's this kind of, the baby has to kind of hold in their neck or brace in order to keep their head connected. And we think not so great for their movement development, not so great for their sense of safety and sense of support under them. Okay, I think I'm going to stop.
I have a question about picking up under the arms. Does that remain relevant throughout the entire time? Because I mean, he's so wriggly and squirmy and active. Sometimes I don't know how I'm like chasing. I don't know if you saw me trying to change his diaper. It took me like 10 minutes because he's just like, I feel like I'm not applying the right principles and trying to handle him, but I just don't know how to handle him right now.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi, Isabel.
Were you about to say something, Amy?
I was, but you, okay.
No, go for it.
The picking up from underneath, we do recommend all the time, all the way through toddlerness, all the way through, you know, as long as you're picking them up, and even if you're picking them up as adults, whatever that would look like. Because the idea is that part of the idea is that as they get older, if you can scoop in and get underneath them, you can get underneath their legs, and their arms can be involved in taking a hold of you, or their arms can be involved, like they can keep playing with whatever toy they're playing with. What it does require is that the person picking up has to be able to get down low. So if I can't get down very low, it's easier for me to reach my arms down and just pick someone up. But if I can squat down or bend down or get down low enough to get my hands under their butt, the idea is like the principles apply all the way through whatever age they are.
So if I'm picking him up under the arms from the crib, that's fine. Because I mean, there's no way that I
understand. Like sometimes, like, right. I was just going to bring up the crib example. Like there are probably some places where it's really hard to get down. So what we say is, and we also try not to be dogmatic. So if you have to pick up the baby under the arms, get underneath them and support them underneath as soon as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And then for being wiggly, Elena, it looks like you're doing like all the things that we talk about, they just get more active. So it starts to mean different things as they get more active. And I mean, one of the things we say, and Sarah's probably said this to you, is that, you know, Reese, he doesn't know that diaper changing time is something to get over with and to get on to the fun thing of life. Like it's one of the big events in his life. So, and it happens a million times. So,
Fortunately.
My baby, Reese's here downstairs already.
Yeah. So, one thing is if you're not in a rush, to let it take the time it takes, because it's time he's getting your attention. You guys, it could be playtime, it could be whatever. He's going to learn about going to the bathroom as not being time to play later. Like that will make sense later. Right now, he doesn't understand diaper change as having to do with like what we think of as going to the bathroom. Diaper change is another movement experience where you're giving him your undivided attention, for better or for worse. And then in the wiggling around, like they start wiggling. I mean, that Sarah said it the other day to someone, oh, in the babies group we have on Fridays, like sometimes you end up changing diapers standing up, and that's what starts being the easiest thing to do, or when they're on their hands and knees, or you do it on the fly as they're crawling. And the principles that we have about like how to move them and how to handle them when they're really wiggly then still apply. That we don't want to grab their arms, we don't want to like inhibit what they can do, but we want to try to support them from underneath. We want their heads to be free to move, but it doesn't mean they're always going to settle down and stay wherever we put them.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions or comments or things you want us to unpack more? There was a lot in this blog post to try to, yeah, there was a lot in there.
I have a question. Two things that in my experience I've seen a lot is, well, two things, as I said. One is parents start to put their baby sitting very early on, very early, and it's very, my experience is, it's hard to explain them, you know, that why you should not do that. Also, another thing that we see a lot is just prop the baby up and kind of help, you know, help the baby to walk. You know, they think this is a very good thing to do. It's always hard for me to explain that. How is your approach when you get to talk to parents about these two subjects that are so, I feel that's very important for them?
Yeah, this is one of the conversations I think we have most often, is why we don't sit and don't stand a baby. So Sarah, do you want to recap what you said and elaborate on that and say the thing about strengthening and exercising also?
Yeah. So at least here in the US, what we hear, pediatricians are often recommending, and what has gotten into the culture, it seems, at large, is that around 4 months, start sitting a baby so that by 6 months they can maintain sitting. And I think that's kind of a term they use, maintain sitting. And we think that at least part of it gets set up, in part because I think CDC guidelines say something about 6 months is a milestone for sitting. And we think it's really unfortunate that in general that the guidelines with milestones and timings, that they get like a particular month is assigned to it, at least the way it plays out in the CDC guidelines here. We think that the sitting thing also is exacerbated because babies generally start to eat solids, and the general recommendation is starting solids around 6 months. And they say a baby should be able to sit up, put them in the high chair or whatever at 6 months. So if those two things go together, that they have to sit up in order and be able to hold themselves up so that they can be fed or eat sitting up, upright, then, and they're going to start eating at 6 months, then we got to start sooner to get them ready for that. We think it's tragic that that has gotten all kind of mixed together. So what we've been, I'll just talk a little bit about the food thing and then talk more about sitting. So what we've been recommending is that there are other ways to help a baby start eating solids, whether it's upright and supported without them having to do this prop sitting thing. So we can hold them against us. We can also, especially if people are, the parents are into letting the baby feed themselves, is to let them feed themselves on the floor if parents have tolerance for the mess. And if the baby has enough movement skills to be able to hold themselves up on their tummy, to shift their weight and to pick up the food and bring it to their mouth. So we're really interested in uncoupling, decoupling the sitting up and the eating. Two things have to go together. So we're strategizing about, well, how else can they eat? Like if I'm lying on my front, propped on my forearm, shifted to the side, my mouth is above my stomach. I've got enough support. It's not more of a choking hazard than sitting up. They should not be leaning back. That's a choking hazard, but they don't need to be vertical. So that's one way we push back on it. The other thing we've seen, or another big thing we've seen, is that a baby who's put in sitting, like they will get stronger. They will learn to do it. But we don't think it's helping them learn to move. What it's helping them learn to do is kind of hold themselves. And a lot of the holding happens in their back body, of kind of holding here and sitting up. And that holding is not, it's a holding skill. It's not a movement skill. And it can lead to a kind of bracing, and more tone in the back body then is really helpful for movement. Now, there's also what we want to fight against or push back against and convince people of other ways, is that we don't need to train a baby or exercise them to get stronger. We hear a lot of this buzzword of core strength, like they're building their core by learning to sit up. And whatever, we could have a long conversation about a definition of core strength, but first of all, we don't think babies need to be strengthened outside of them learning to move. In general, we think that's true of everybody, that strength comes from the movement skills and the organization, not from training a position. Amy, I'm sure you have more to say that I didn't say.
Well, I think that there's, we also run into, like Rosana, you were describing, like holding them up, and they like to stand and they like to help, and we want to help them walk. And one of the things I've been really enjoying seeing, really excited about the idea of, is that a baby doesn't need, as Sarah's kind of been saying, a baby doesn't need to be taught to get to vertical. Like a baby's curiosity will get them to vertical. And babies will learn, but they don't need to be taught. And I think this is it's one of those things in our world, in our culture, I think, around babies, that if we don't teach them to do it, they won't do it. And there's a whole set of theories out there looking at how babies learn, looking at curiosity, looking at the kind of architecture of our body, that is like, we will end up walking if there's no problem. And if a baby never ever even sees someone walk on two legs, that baby will still end up walking, because it's the way that it makes sense in the body to end up locomoting around. Like, we don't end up hopping. Babies don't end up crawling forever. They get to walking. And if we accept that our goal is for a baby's curiosity to lead them somewhere, so going back to our first principles, then if we put them in a vertical position, like sitting or standing, we're putting them in a position, if they can't get themselves there, where they haven't had the opportunity to keep matching their senses and the perceptual interpretation, which means that vertical position might ask them to handle more than they know how to handle. And if they get there because they're put there, instead of getting there because their curiosity has gotten them there, the being there becomes a whole different experience. And what we want is for their curiosity to lead them into these new positions, from which in each new position, like sitting and then standing, when they get themselves there, their world gets bigger, in the process of getting there, because they have the skills to have gotten there, they can process more of the world, right? And so to me, the big thing to go back to is that they don't need to be taught to do this. They'll get themselves there. So our job is not to do it for them or to teach them to do it. And to us, the sitting and standing question is different than holding them in vertical, and like holding them chest to chest in vertical, or holding and sitting like Sarah was showing maybe for feeding. That is not the same kind of unsupported sitting that we argue so much against. And we do think we still think horizontal holding is better than vertical holding, but we're not saying don't ever hold a baby right up like chest to chest with you. But the independent sitting and the independent standing and the mindset that comes out of, where we're gonna show them how to do it, and we're gonna help them, and we're gonna teach them to walk. That whole mindset we want to dismantle. Then the one other thing that we hear sometimes is that they like it. They like it. And two things in there. One is that being stimulated and being happy might look alike, but might not be the same thing. So what does they like it look like? And also, do they like being vertical, or do they like being up closer to us? And could we meet them by coming down and being face to face with them down lower, instead of them having to come to us to get that face to face kind of meeting?
So this is like quite resonant to me, because Florian's like 6.5 months, and like he's not even close to sitting. And so like so much of the, like baby carriers and different things, everything is like 6 months sitting, and like I don't even know, he's just so far away from that sitting place. And I feel like that I hear a lot of that, like, but he likes it and you have to teach him to do that. So if that isn't the case, I don't feel like he does like it that much, but if that is the case, that he's so far away from sitting, like when do they sit? Like when is the time in which he would, is it when he goes from crawling? Is it like with crawling?
We see babies get to sitting, well, if babies aren't put in sitting, and there's not this goal of 6 months sitting, we see babies get to sitting on their own anywhere from 6 to 12 months, let's say. It's a big range. Some babies learn to get up by side shifting in the belly crawling stage and then pushing up through their side. Some babies learn to get to sitting after they've gotten up to hands and knees, maybe even crawling, and then they learn to shift their hips, their butt to one side or the other to get to sitting. Another aspect of, so babies often get to sitting later than 6 months, usually get to sitting later in our experience than 6 months if they're not put in sitting. And we don't think that's a problem. We don't think it's that they're delaying it. It's like they're doing other things and they're building super important skills. I wanted to say one more thing about sitting before I forget, is we also relate the putting a baby in sitting and propping them with potential really, we don't think it's supporting their agency. So if the baby's put in sitting before they can get there themselves, means they don't have the skills to get out of it well, to know how to get out of it. So they don't have the falling pathways, they don't have the reflexes to reach an arm out and support themselves. We sometimes see that they kind of fall forward and they'll do a kind of tripod prop with their arms in front of them. But it's not a position that promotes them to feel a sense of agency. They can hold themselves there and they will get better at that. Or they can kind of fall in a way that's not a skillful fall. And kind of at its extreme, babies who are put in sitting, many of them are, most babies end up fine anyway, but babies who are sat, some of them go on to crawl, but some of them get really comfortable, or I don't know if it's comfortable because it's not really our definition of comfort, but they get used to sitting there. And then if they can't move away, then there's a way we have to bring things to them. We have to bring them toys. If the toy rolls away and they can't get to it to get it and come back, often the toy's brought back to them. And we think that's potentially sets up a relationship to the world of, I'm going to sit here and things are going to be brought to me. I don't know how to go out and get what I want in the world. And that is not, we don't think that's supporting their agency. And we think that this time of them learning to move is the time when they're learning about how to get in and out of situations, how to strategize and problem solve about how they're going to get to the thing that they want to get to, how they're going to deal with frustration, how they're going to explore the world and find their way in it.
I've always wondered if all of that baby equipment like high chairs and carriers like Ashley mentioned, when they say, sitting independently, I always assumed they didn't mean that they get into sit themselves, but if somebody plops them there, that they'll be able to stay.
Yeah.
I've not, obviously you guys are the kid experts, but I've not ever heard of a child being able to get into sit at 6 months.
No, and some of the really detailed timelines, if you read them closely, kind of the more academic ones, they'll say can sit independently at 6 months, but they'll say at 8 or 9 months can transition themselves into and out of sitting. So there's a difference between sitting and getting yourself into sitting. And we'd like the being in sitting to be more tied to getting yourself into it, which puts it on the at 8 or 9 months or even later, like Sarah said.
Yeah, it's a little oxymoron there to say independent sitting when they can't actually get there or out of it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Let's reframe that.
Yeah. We are at the end of our time. It's 2:01. So I'm gonna see, is there anyone who wants to say something who hasn't said anything so far? Any comment or question? I think we might not answer the question, but you could put it out there and let us know what you're interested in. So any comments or questions for those of you that haven't said anything yet?
I just wanted to say I'm very appreciative when you talked about the difference between being stimulated and being happy. I think there's a lot of misinterpretation as well around reflexes and all of that. Of course, need a lot of time to speak about it, but I really appreciate you pointing that out.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's a big question, big one.
I'm just curious here, so it's a question actually for Ashley. How old is your son, Ashley? That I've been seeing for a while.
He's 6.5 months. I'm going to answer for her because she's muted and lying down, but he's 6.5 months. Florian. Okay, so I'm gonna end our recording there, and thank you all for coming. And